They thought I was just another feeble old woman, harmless and irrelevant. They pushed me away from the signing table, humiliated me in front of dozens of people, certain I would quietly disappear into the shadows where they believed I belonged. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that for years, I had been methodically preparing a counter-strike that would leave them all standing in stunned silence, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. My name is Margaret Caldwell, though most people call me Maggie. I'm 68 years old, and until that Tuesday afternoon in the gleaming conference room of Pinnacle Real Estate Group in downtown Austin, I had always believed that family meant something more than blood and convenience. The mahogany table stretched before me like a battlefield, its polished surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. Around it sat lawyers in $1,000 suits, real estate executives with practiced smiles, and at the center of it all, my son Lucas and his wife Vanessa, both radiating the kind of smug satisfaction that comes from believing you've already won. I had arrived early, as was my habit from decades of working as a senior administrator at Midwest Mutual Insurance, a company that existed only in my employment history, carefully constructed to explain my financial acumen without revealing too much. I chose a seat near the middle of the table, close enough to hear everything but not so prominent as to draw attention. Old habits die hard. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Lucas's voice cut through the pre-meeting chatter like a blade. He stood in the doorway, his tailored navy suit impeccable, his expression considerably less so. "You said this was a family investment," I replied quietly, folding my hands in my lap. "I thought—" "Oh, Maggie!" Vanessa's laugh tinkled like breaking glass as she swept into the room, her red-bottomed heels clicking against the marble floor. "This is a $64 million commercial development deal. You're not on the deeds, sweetie." The sweetie dripped with condescension, each syllable carefully crafted to remind me of my place. She moved toward my chair with the confidence of a predator who's cornered its prey. "Come on," she said, placing a manicured hand on my chair and pulling it back from the table. The wheels squeaked against the floor, the sound echoing in the suddenly quiet room. "Let's not confuse things. You can wait in the lobby if you'd like. This shouldn't take more than an hour or two." I looked around the room. The lawyers shuffled their papers. The executives studied their phones. Not a single person met my eyes. Even Lucas had turned away, adjusting his cufflinks as if the most fascinating thing in the world was ensuring they were perfectly aligned. "Mother," he said without looking at me, his voice carrying that particular tone of embarrassment mixed with irritation that I'd heard so often lately. "You're too old to understand these complex financial instruments. Let the younger generation handle this. It's what Dad would have wanted." The mention of my late husband, Harold, felt like a slap. Harold, who had built our modest wealth through careful saving and smart investments. Harold, who had trusted me to manage our finances for 43 years of marriage. Harold, who would have been horrified to see his son treating me like an unwanted piece of furniture. Vanessa's grip on my chair tightened. "We really need to get started," she announced to the room. "Important people have schedules to keep." The implication was clear. I was not important. I was not needed. I was not wanted. I stood slowly, my movements deliberate and measured. Let them think it was age that made me move so carefully. Let them believe I was exactly what they saw, a harmless old woman, out of place in their world of high finance and higher ambitions. "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the burning in my chest. "I'll wait outside." As I gathered my purse, I caught a glimpse of the documents spread across the table. Development plans, financial projections, architectural renderings of a massive mixed-use complex. And there, in bold letters at the top of one page, Westwood Heights Development, final closing documents. I paused at the doorway and looked back. Lucas and Vanessa had already taken their seats, leaning over the documents with eager expressions. The lawyers were pulling out pens, preparing for signatures. The entire room hummed with the energy of a deal about to close, millions of dollars about to change hands. "Excuse me," I said softly. Every head turned. "I just wanted to say, good luck with everything." Vanessa's smile was sharp as a knife. "Thanks, Maggie. We won't need it, but the sentiment is sweet." I nodded and left, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. Behind me, I heard the door close with a definitive click, shutting me out of their world. But as I settled onto a leather bench in the marble lobby, I didn't feel hurt or angry. Instead, I felt something else entirely, a cold, crystalline clarity that had been building for years. They thought they had pushed aside a harmless old woman. They had no idea they had just activated a plan 5 years in the making. I opened my purse and touched the edge of a folder hidden inside. Soon enough, they would learn that some old women are anything but harmless. Some of us have simply learned to hide our claws until the perfect moment to strike. The humiliation in that conference room wasn't the first, nor was it the worst. As I sat in that cold marble lobby, memories flooded back like water through a broken dam, each one adding another layer to the sediment of resentment that had been building for years. It started small, as these things often do. 3 years ago, just 6 months after Harold's funeral, Vanessa had thrown her first dinner party in the house Lucas and I had shared since his father's death. She introduced me to her friends from the country club as Lucas's live-in help. "This is Margaret," she had said, her arm draped possessively over my son's shoulder. "She's been with the family forever. So devoted. She even does her own cooking and cleaning still. Isn't that precious?" The women had smiled at me with the kind of pitying looks reserved for elderly servants. I had stood there in my good dress, the navy one Harold had loved, holding a tray of canapes I'd spent all afternoon preparing, and felt myself shrinking under their gaze. "Actually," I had started to say, "this is my—" "Maggie, dear, could you check on the roast?" Vanessa had cut me off smoothly. "You know how Lucas loves your pot roast. It's practically the only thing he asks for anymore." That was a lie. Lucas hadn't asked for my cooking in months. Vanessa had hired a catering service for the dinner, relegating my pot roast to the garbage disposal an hour before the guests arrived. "Too heavy," she'd declared, "too old-fashioned." Just like me, apparently. Then came the garden incident. I had spent 20 years cultivating that organic vegetable garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, squash, herbs, everything Harold and I had eaten came from that soil, tended with my own hands. It was my sanctuary, my connection to the earth and to my husband's memory. One morning, I woke to the sound of machinery. By the time I reached the window, half of it was gone, bulldozed to make room for Vanessa's infinity pool. "You can buy vegetables at Whole Foods. Maggie," she'd said when I confronted her, tears streaming down my face. "Besides, all that dirt and mulch. It's not really up to neighborhood standards, is it? We have an image to maintain." Lucas had stood beside her, nodding. "It's for the best, Mother. You're getting too old to be digging in the dirt anyway. What if you hurt yourself?" Too old, too weak, too irrelevant. The dining room table came next, the solid oak piece Harold had surprised me with for our 10th anniversary. We'd raised Lucas at that table, helped him with homework, celebrated birthdays and holidays. Vanessa replaced it with a glass and chrome monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a museum. Not a home. "Your old table is in the garage. Lucas had informed me, if you want it so badly, you can pay to have it moved to a storage unit." Pay. In the house I had lived in for 35 years, I was now expected to pay for the privilege of keeping my own belongings. Which brought me to the electricity bill incident 2 years ago. Lucas had sat me down for what he called a family financial meeting. Vanessa was there, of course, her tablet out, fingers flying across the screen as she took notes. "Mother, we need to talk about household expenses," Lucas had begun. "Vanessa and I have been reviewing the bills, and we think it's only fair that you contribute." "Contribute?" I'd echoed. "Lucas, I paid off the mortgage on this house. I covered your student loans, your car, your—" "That was then," Vanessa had interrupted. "This is now. We all need to pull our weight. A third of the utilities seems reasonable." don't you think? A third? They wanted me to pay a third of the bills in my own home, the home I'd already paid for in full, the home where they'd allocated me increasingly smaller spaces, pushing me out of the master bedroom after Harold died, then out of the guest room when Vanessa decided she needed a home office. But the basement, that was the deepest cut. Last year, I developed pneumonia. Nothing too serious, the doctors said, but at my age, it required a brief hospital stay. When Lucas brought me home 4 days later, my room had been transformed into a rental unit, complete with a new lock on the door and fresh paint on the walls. "We've moved your things downstairs," Vanessa had announced brightly, as if she'd done me a favor. "The basement apartment is perfect for you. It has its own entrance, so you can come and go without disturbing anyone. And look, we even installed a little kitchenette." A kitchenette, a hot plate, and a mini fridge in what used to be Harold's workshop. That's what my life had been reduced to, a cold basement corner in the house where I'd raised my family, hosted Christmas dinners, and nursed my husband through his final illness. "The rental income will help with the mortgage," Lucas had explained, not meeting my eyes. "What mortgage?" I'd asked, genuinely confused. "I paid off this house 15 years ago." "The second mortgage," Vanessa had said smoothly, "for the renovations, the pool, the kitchen upgrade, the smart home system, investments in our future." Our future, not mine, never mine. Each slight, each dismissal, each casual cruelty, I had absorbed them all, filed them away in what I came to think of as my mental ledger. A lifetime of keeping books had taught me the importance of accurate records. Every debit must eventually be balanced with a credit. And as I sat in that lobby, listening to the muffled sounds of my son and his wife signing away millions of dollars, I knew the time for balancing had finally come. They thought they had gotten rid of me, cleared the last obstacle from their path to wealth and status. They had no idea that the harmless old woman in the basement had been keeping very careful books indeed. The plan began the day I received Harold's life insurance settlement. Lucas and Vanessa didn't know about the policy. Harold had purchased it through a friend who worked at a small firm, keeping it separate from our other finances. He'd always been cautious that way, believing in what he called layers of security. $1 million, not a fortune by today's standards, but enough. More than enough for what I had in mind. I remember sitting in my cold basement room at 2:30 a.m., the check in my hands, thinking about what Harold would want me to do. Not this, certainly. He'd been a gentleman who believed in forgiveness and second chances. But Harold had never been pushed out of his own home, never been relegated to servant status by his own blood. The first call I made was to Evelyn Rhodes. Evelyn and I had worked together at Midwest Mutual 40 years ago, before she left to start her own financial consulting firm. We'd kept in touch through Christmas cards and the occasional lunch, but I knew she'd gone on to bigger things, discreet things, the kind of financial maneuvering that happened in shadows and behind closed doors. "Maggie Caldwell," she'd said when she heard my voice. "How long has it been?" "Too long," I replied. "Evelyn, I need your help, and I need it to be, private." There was a pause, then, "How private are we talking?" "Delaware private." She'd laughed, a low, knowing sound. "Now that's interesting. Little Maggie wants to play with the big kids. When can you meet?" We met at a coffee shop in Round Rock, far enough from Austin that I wouldn't run into anyone from Lucas and Vanessa's circle. Evelyn looked exactly as I remembered, sharp eyes behind designer glasses, silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, wearing the kind of understated suit that whispered rather than shouted its price tag. "Tell me everything, Mas," she'd said simply. So I did. The humiliations, the financial manipulations, the way they'd pushed me aside. And then I told her about the Westwood Heights development. "I've been watching," I explained. "Lucas comes home late, leaves papers out. Vanessa talks loudly on the phone. They think I'm too old and stupid to understand what they're saying." "But you understand perfectly," Evelyn murmured. "I know they've over-leveraged themselves. I know they need this deal to avoid bankruptcy, and I know exactly which parcels of land the development requires. Evelyn's smile was sharp as a blade. And you want to buy them first? Not me, I corrected. A trust, anonymous, untraceable. That's my girl. Setting up the Greystone Investment Trust took 3 weeks. Evelyn handled the paperwork through her Delaware connections, creating layers of separation between me and the trust. To anyone looking, it would appear to be just another faceless investment vehicle, the kind that bought and sold property every day in Texas. The next step was research, real research, not the casual eavesdropping I'd been doing. I spent hours at the Austin Public Library, using their computers to dig into property records, development plans, zoning applications. I learned that Pinnacle Real Estate Group, the company handling the Westwood Heights project, was publicly traded. I learned that 3 key parcels of land were still in play. And I learned that the company developing the project, Horizon Development Partners, was hungry for investors. Start small, Evelyn advised during one of our clandestine meetings. Buy the land parcels first. That gives you leverage. But I had bigger plans. Why stop at leverage when you could have control? Over the course of 6 months, the Greystone Investment Trust quietly purchased not just the 3 crucial land parcels, but also began accumulating shares in Pinnacle Real Estate Group, never too much at once, never enough to trigger disclosure requirements, just a steady trickle, like water wearing away at stone. The beautiful part was the money itself. Harold's insurance settlement was just the beginning. The investments Evelyn recommended performed remarkably well. It was as if the universe itself was conspiring to help me, multiplying my resources with each passing month. By year 3, Greystone Investment Trust held 42% of Pinnacle Real Estate Group through various subsidiaries. We were, in effect, the largest shareholder, though the complex structure Evelyn had created meant that nobody knew it. The trust also owned the land parcels essential to the Westwood Heights development. You could stop here. Evelyn told me one afternoon, you have enough to block their deal, to force them to negotiate. You could make them pay through the nose for those parcels. I don't want their money, I replied, staring at the financial statements spread before us. I want them to know what it feels like to have everything taken away. Evelyn studied me over her glasses. The Maggie I knew 40 years ago wouldn't have said that. The Maggie you knew 40 years ago hadn't been thrown away like garbage by her own son. She nodded slowly. So what's the end game? I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying for weeks. Inside were incorporation documents for a non-profit organization, the Silver Haven Foundation, dedicated to providing housing and support for elderly women abandoned by their families. I'm going to give it all away, I said quietly. Every penny they thought they'd make, every property they dreamed of owning, all of it will go to helping women like me, women they would push aside and forget. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she raised her coffee cup in a toast. Harold would be horrified, she said, but I think he'd also be a little bit proud. As I left that meeting, I felt the pieces of my plan clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Lucas and Vanessa had no idea what was coming. They were so focused on their grand plans, their millions of dollars, their ascent into Austin's elite. They never once looked down to notice the foundation crumbling beneath their feet. And why would they? I was just the old woman in the basement, too feeble to understand their complex financial instruments. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Lucas and Vanessa needed $25 million for their portion of the development deal, money they didn't have, despite all their posturing. I knew this because Vanessa had a habit of pacing the kitchen during her phone calls, voice rising with each desperate attempt to secure funding. We need a bridge loan, I heard her tell someone one evening, just for 90 days. Once the development is approved and pre-sales begin, we can pay it back with interest. But the banks had looked at their financials, the second mortgage on my house, the maxed out credit lines, the failed investments in cryptocurrency and tech startups, and politely declined. Traditional lenders saw what Lucas and Vanessa refused to acknowledge. They were drowning in debt, treading water with designer shoes. That's when Greystone Investment Trust made its appearance. The offer came through Pinnacle Real Estate Group's commercial lending division, a division that, unbeknownst to anyone, answered ultimately to the majority shareholder, which was, through several layers of corporate veiling, me. "It's perfect," Lucas had announced at dinner, slapping the papers on the glass table with triumph. $25 million bridge loan, standard commercial terms. Some investment trust out of Delaware wants to get into the Texas market. I was washing dishes. They still expected me to clean up after their meals, even though I ate alone in the basement and kept my back turned. "That sounds too good to be true," I offered mildly. "That's what I said," Vanessa chimed in, "but their terms are actually quite reasonable. 12% interest, 90-day term, standard default clauses." Standard default clauses. If they had read past the interest rate, if they had paid attention to anything beyond the dollar signs, they would have seen the trap. But they were desperate, and desperate people don't read fine print. The critical clause was buried on page 47 of the agreement, in the kind of dense legal language that makes eyes glaze over. In the event of default, defined as failure to repay the full principal and interest within the specified 90-day term, the lender shall have the right to call due all obligations and exercise any and all remedies available under law, including but not limited to conversion of debt to equity in the underlying property holdings at a rate of 50 cents on the dollar. In plain English, if they didn't pay back every penny in exactly 90 days, they would lose everything, and I would own it all for half price. "Did you have a lawyer review this?" I asked, still scrubbing the same plate. Lucas laughed, the dismissive sound I'd grown so accustomed to. "Mother, please. I've been doing real estate deals for 10 years. I think I can read a simple loan document." Simple, if only he knew. They signed the papers the following Tuesday. I knew because Lucas came home whistling, something he only did when he thought he'd won. Vanessa opened a bottle of champagne that cost more than my monthly food budget. "To Westwood Heights," she toasted, "to finally playing in the big leagues." They didn't offer me a glass, not that I would have accepted it. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the 90-day term was specifically calculated. I had inside information from my position at Pinnacle that the city's development approval process was backed up by at least 120 days. Even if everything went perfectly, they wouldn't see a dime from pre-sales until well after their loan came due. But I wasn't content to leave anything to chance. Through Evelyn's connections, I arranged for several environmental impact studies to be filed regarding the Westwood Heights location. Each one required review, adding weeks to the approval process. A concerned citizens group, funded by an anonymous donor, began showing up at city council meetings, raising questions about traffic impact and water usage. None of it was illegal. It was all perfectly legitimate civic engagement. The fact that it pushed their timeline past the point of no return was just unfortunate. By day 60, Lucas had stopped whistling. The champagne bottles disappeared, replaced by empty whiskey glasses and the sound of hushed, frantic phone calls. "The city wants another traffic study," I heard him tell Vanessa one night. "That's another 30 days minimum. Can we get an extension on the loan?" I tried. They won't budge. Said the terms were clearly stated in the agreement. By day 75, the desperation was palpable. They tried everything, other banks, private lenders, even Lucas's golf buddies, but word had gotten out about their situation. Nobody wanted to touch a deal that was starting to smell like failure. "What about your mother?" I heard Vanessa suggest one evening. I was in the basement, but their voices carried through the thin floors. "She must have some money saved up." "My mother?" Lucas's laugh was bitter. "She's living in the basement on Social Security. What money would she have?" If only he had asked, if only he had, just once in the past 3 years, treated me as something more than an inconvenience, I might have felt a twinge of mercy. But he didn't ask. Neither of them did. On day 85, I saw Lucas in the kitchen at 3:45 a.m., surrounded by spreadsheets and loan documents. His hair was disheveled, his usually pristine shirt wrinkled and stained with coffee. He looked up when I entered, and for just a moment, I saw something in his eyes that might have been fear. "Can't sleep?" I asked gently. He shook his head, then looked back at his papers. "Big deal closing soon. Just making sure everything's in order." I poured myself a glass of water, taking my time. "Is there anything I can do to help?" He actually laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Unless you've got $25 million hidden in that basement of yours, no." I stood there for a moment, glass in hand, waiting, hoping. Give me a reason. I thought, show me the son I raised. Ask for help. Show some humility. Show me you see me as more than furniture. But he just turned back to his papers, dismissing me without a word. "Good night, Lucas," I said softly. He didn't respond. 5 days later, on day 90, the loan would come due. They would default, and everything they had built their dreams on would crumble like a house of cards. The trap hadn't just been set. It had already snapped shut. They just didn't know it yet. Day 90 arrived with the kind of crystalline morning that makes Austin shine. I dressed carefully in my best suit, not the dated navy one I'd worn to Harold's funeral, but a new charcoal gray ensemble I'd purchased specifically for this occasion. Conservative, professional, forgettable. The kind of outfit that whispered harmless elderly woman to anyone who bothered to look. The signing was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the same Pinnacle Real Estate Group conference room where I'd been humiliated 90 days earlier. This time, I arrived exactly on time. The atmosphere was different now. Where before there had been champagne bubble excitement, now the air hung heavy with desperation. Lucas sat at the table, his face drawn and pale, dark circles under his eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. Vanessa was there too, her usually perfect appearance showing cracks, a chip in her manicure, a slight run in her stockings, hair that looked professionally styled but somehow brittle. "Mother?" Lucas looked up, confusion flickering across his face. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Vanessa's expression hardened. "We don't have time for this," she snapped. "Whatever family drama you're here to create, save it. We have real business to handle." She thrust a document at me, a power of attorney form. "Since you're here, you might as well make yourself useful. Sign this. It'll make things easier for everyone." I looked at the paper. It would give Lucas complete control over any assets in my name, effectively cutting me out of any financial decisions permanently. The final insult. They wanted me to sign away even the pretense of autonomy. "What does this have to do with your loan?" I asked mildly. Lucas's jaw tightened. "Just sign it, Mother. If we lose this deal because you're being difficult..." "You'll what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Throw me out? You've already relegated me to the basement, take away my dignity? That ship has sailed? Cut me out of your life? Lucas, you did that 3 years ago." "Listen here," Vanessa started, but the conference room door opened, cutting her off. James Morrison entered first, the president of Pinnacle Real Estate Group, a man I'd observed from afar but never met in person. Behind him was Patricia Walsh, senior legal counsel, and a younger man I didn't recognize carrying a thick folder of documents. "Good morning," Morrison said, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me with surprising warmth. "Mrs. Caldwell, thank you for joining us. I trust you received our message?" Lucas's head snapped between Morrison and me. "You know my mother?" Morrison's smile was professional but carried an edge. "Know her? Mr. Caldwell, your mother is one of our most important stakeholders. Didn't she tell you?" The color drained from Lucas's face. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "I don't understand," Lucas managed. Patricia Walsh stepped forward, setting her briefcase on the table with a decisive click. "Perhaps we should clarify the situation. Mrs. Caldwell, as the controlling interest in Greystone Investment Trust, holds 42% of Pinnacle Real Estate Group. She is also, through the trust, your creditor in the matter of the $25 million bridge loan that came due this morning." "That's impossible," Vanessa whispered. "Additionally," Walsh continued, as if Vanessa hadn't spoken, "Greystone Investment Trust owns the 3 parcels of land essential to the Westwood Heights development. Without those parcels, the entire project is dead in the water." I watched my son's face cycle through emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, a dawning horror as the pieces clicked into place. "You?" His voice cracked. "You're behind Greystone?" I met his gaze steadily. "Every penny of it." "But how? You don't have any money. You live in a basement. You're on Social Security." "I live in a basement because you put me there," I said quietly. "As for money, your father was a very careful man. He made sure I would be provided for, even if my own son wouldn't." Morrison cleared his throat. "The loan is now in default, according to the terms you agreed to, and I have to say, Mrs. Caldwell, that was particularly elegant structuring. Greystone Investment Trust can now convert the debt to equity at 50 cents on the dollar. This effectively gives the trust full control of your stake in the development." "No." Lucas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "She can't do this. She's old, confused. She doesn't understand." "I understand perfectly." I stood as well, matching his posture. "I understand that you over-leveraged yourselves. I understand that you gambled everything on this deal without having the capital to back it up. I understand that you signed loan documents without reading them carefully because you were too arrogant to think anyone could outsmart you." "This is theft!" Vanessa shrieked, her composure finally cracking completely. "You conniving old witch! We'll sue!" Patricia Walsh's smile was sharp. "On what grounds? Everything was done legally. You signed the documents, you took the money. You failed to repay according to the terms you agreed to. No court in Texas will find fault with that." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder, not the one I'd touched in the lobby 90 days ago, but its twin. "However, I'm not interested in taking your stake in the development." Hope flickered in Lucas's eyes. "You're not?" "No." I opened the folder, revealing a new set of documents. "I'm giving it away." The room fell silent as I spread the papers across the polished table. Transfer documents, all of them. Every asset Greystone Investment Trust held related to the Westwood Heights development. The land, the equity stake, all of it would be transferred to the Silver Haven Foundation. "What is that?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a nonprofit I established," I explained, allowing myself a small smile. "It provides housing and support for elderly women who have been abandoned or abused by their families. The Westwood Heights development will be converted into affordable senior housing. No luxury condos, no high-end retail, just safe, dignified homes for women who have been thrown away by the people who should have cared for them." I looked at Vanessa. "Your name will be on every building. By the way, the Lucas and Vanessa Caldwell Center for Senior Care. I thought it was important that everyone knows exactly who made this possible." The implication was clear. Their names would forever be associated with the failure of their grand plans, transformed into a monument to their greed and cruelty. "You can't," Lucas said weakly. "Mother, please, we'll be ruined." "Yes," I agreed, "you will be." And for the first time in 3 years, I felt the warmth of genuine satisfaction. The silence in the conference room was deafening. Lucas had collapsed back into his chair, his face the color of old paper. Vanessa stood frozen, her perfectly painted lips forming a small O of shock. But I wasn't finished. The financial destruction was only the first movement of this symphony. I reached into my purse again, this time pulling out my phone. "There's one more thing," I said, my voice steady as granite. "You should know that Texas is a one-party consent state for recordings." Vanessa's eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare!" 3 months ago," I continued, scrolling through my files, "you had a particularly interesting conversation in the kitchen. You were on speakerphone with your friend Jennifer from the country club. Would you like me to refresh your memory?" I touched the play button, and Vanessa's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable through the phone's speaker. Once we close this deal, Lucas's mother becomes a liability we can't afford. I've already researched several facilities. There's one in Houston that specializes in difficult cases. We'll tell people she's developing dementia. Who's going to question it? She's almost 70. Lives in a basement, talks to herself. By Christmas, she'll be drooling in a locked ward, and we'll have power of attorney over everything. The recording continued, but I clicked it off. I didn't need to play the part where she'd laughed about selling my mother's wedding ring, or how she'd already measured the basement for a home gym. That's taken out of context. Vanessa stammered. Is it? I pulled up another file. How about this one from 2 weeks ago? This time, it was Lucas's voice, talking to someone named Brad. The old bat actually thinks she's still part of this family. Once this deal closes and we don't need her house as collateral anymore. She's gone. Vanessa found a place that's basically a warehouse for the elderly. Medicaid will cover most of it once we hide her assets. Morrison and Walsh exchanged glances. The younger associate had stopped taking notes, his pen suspended over his legal pad. I have 47 recordings, I said quietly. Would you like to hear the one where you discuss staging a fall to have me declared incompetent? Or perhaps the one where you forge my signature on a DNR order? Those recordings are illegal, Lucas shouted, finally finding his voice. Patricia Walsh shook her head. Actually, they're not. As your mother correctly stated, Texas is a one-party consent state. She was party to these conversations. Even if you didn't realize she was listening, every recording is admissible. I set my phone on the table. I've already sent copies to my attorney, also to a journalist at the Austin American-Statesman, who's very interested in stories about elder abuse among the city's wealthy families. She's particularly intrigued by the fact that you were planning to commit fraud while developing senior housing. The irony, she said, writes itself. Vanessa lunged for my phone, but Morrison smoothly intercepted her. Mrs. Caldwell, I would advise against any physical confrontation. Assault charges would only compound your current difficulties. Current difficulties? She laughed, high and hysterical. She's destroyed us. Don't you understand? Without this deal, we lose everything. Yes, I said simply. That was the point. I gathered the transfer documents, signing each one with deliberate care, with every signature. I was signing away millions of dollars, and with every signature, I felt lighter, freer, more myself than I'd been in years. The story will run tomorrow morning, I continued conversationally. Front page of the business section. I'm told, local developer couple's elderly abuse scheme exposed in failed land deal. Though I think they're still workshopping the headline. Lucas found his voice again. Mother, please, think about what you're doing. Your grandchildren. What grandchildren? I asked. The ones Vanessa told her mother she'd never have because pregnancy would ruin her figure? Or the hypothetical ones you'd never let me see anyway? I finished signing the last document and slid the stack to Patricia Walsh. It's done. The Silver Haven Foundation now owns everything. You vindictive bitch, Vanessa hissed. I stood, gathering my purse with unhurried movements. Perhaps, but I'm a vindictive bitch with a home, dignity, and the satisfaction of knowing that your greed will help house hundreds of women who've been thrown away by families like yours. Morrison stood as well, extending his hand to me. Mrs. Caldwell, on behalf of Pinnacle Real Estate Group, I want to thank you for your vision. The Silver Haven development will be a landmark project for our company. We're honored to be part of it. I shook his hand, then turned to my son one last time. He looked broken, aged 10 years and 10 minutes. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the little boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, seeking comfort and safety. Lucas, I said softly, I loved you more than life itself. I would have given you everything freely and with joy. All you had to do was treat me like a mother, like a human being. Was that really so much to ask? He didn't answer. Couldn't. Perhaps. The house will need to be vacated within 30 days, Patricia Walsh said. All business, It's being transferred to the foundation as part of the agreement. Mrs. Caldwell, I believe you've already made arrangements? I nodded. I've purchased a condo downtown, small but mine, with windows that actually see sunlight. As I walked to the door, my heels clicking on the marble with newfound confidence. I heard Vanessa's voice one more time. What are we supposed to do? Where are we supposed to go? I paused at the threshold, not turning around. I hear there's a lovely facility in Houston that specializes in difficult cases. Though you might want to hurry, I understand they have a waiting list. The door closed behind me with a satisfying click, cutting off whatever response they might have made. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman looking back at me stood straight and tall, her eyes bright with purpose. For the first time in 3 years, I recognized myself. The security guard nodded as I passed. Have a good day, ma'am. You know what? I said, surprising us both with the genuine warmth in my voice. I believe I will. Outside, Austin's morning sun felt like a benediction on my face. Tomorrow, the city would wake up to the scandal. By week's end, Lucas and Vanessa would be social pariahs, their credit destroyed, their dreams in ashes. But today, I had balanced the books. The Austin American-Statesman ran the story on page 1 of the business section, just as promised, but what I hadn't anticipated was how quickly it would spread. By noon, it was trending on social media. By evening, local news stations had picked it up. Within 48 hours, it had gone national. Elder abuse exposed in multi-million-dollar Austin real estate scandal. The headline was everywhere, accompanied by a particularly unflattering photo of Lucas and Vanessa from some charity gala, their smiles looking predatory under the harsh examination of public scrutiny. I watched from my new condo, a modest but sun-filled space on the 15th floor with views of Lady Bird Lake. Evelyn sat beside me on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, scrolling through her tablet. The recording of Vanessa discussing the nursing home scheme has been played over 2 million times, she reported. Someone made it into a TikTok sound. Gen Z is having a field day with it. I sipped my own wine, a nice Malbec I'd bought to celebrate. I didn't even know what TikTok was until this week. Well, you're viral now. They're calling you Grandma Revenge and the Basement Beethoven. She showed me her screen. Look, someone made a remix of Vanessa saying drooling in a locked ward set to dance music. It was cruel, perhaps, but no crueler than what they'd planned for me. My phone buzzed, another text from Lucas. I'd stopped reading them after the first dozen, all variations on the same themes of fury, self-pity, and demands that I fix this mess. Vanessa had tried calling too, until I blocked her number. The last voicemail I'd listened to was just screaming. Their country club membership was revoked yesterday, Evelyn mentioned casually. My friend on the board said it was unanimous. Apparently, planning to institutionalize your mother-in-law doesn't align with their values. Imagine that. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but the building had excellent security. The concierge wouldn't have let anyone up without calling first. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed but looking harried. She held an envelope in one hand and an iPad in the other. I opened the door cautiously. Can I help you? A Mrs. Caldwell? I'm Sandra Morrison from Channel 7 News. I was hoping... No interviews, I said firmly, starting to close the door. Wait! She thrust the envelope forward. I'm not here as a reporter. Well, not exactly. This is from my mother. She lives at Shady Oaks Senior Community. She wanted me to give this to you personally. Curious despite myself, I took the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on floral stationery. Asterisk. Dear Mrs. Caldwell, you don't know me, but I know what it's like to be thrown away by family. My son put me in this place 2 years ago and hasn't visited once. Watching your story on the news gave me hope. Thank you for standing up for all of us who can't. God bless you. Eleanor Morrison asterisk. I looked up to find Sandra wiping her eyes. I didn't know, she said quietly. About my brother. About what he did to Mom. I live in Dallas, and he told me she wanted to be in the facility. that it was her choice. After seeing your story, I went to visit her. The things she told me. She composed herself, straightening her shoulders. Anyway, I'm moving her in with me next week, and I wanted to thank you. Your story opened my eyes. After she left, I stood in my doorway for a moment, the letter trembling in my hands. I'd expected the public humiliation of Lucas and Vanessa to be the end of it. I hadn't considered that the story might resonate beyond our family drama. By the end of the week, my new attorney, recommended by Evelyn, naturally, had fielded over 100 calls. Elderly parents wanting advice, adult children reconsidering their care decisions, advocacy groups requesting partnerships with the Silver Haven Foundation. You've started something, he told me during our meeting, whether you intended to or not. The Austin Business Journal ran a follow-up piece on the foundation, including an interview with the architect who'd redesigned the Westwood Heights plans. Instead of luxury condos, there would be affordable senior apartments with communal gardens, a medical clinic, and social spaces designed to combat isolation. The rendering showed my former home transformed into the community center, its basement converted into a bright activity room with windows cut into the walls. We're calling it the Harold Caldwell Memorial Center. The architect explained in the article, Mrs. Caldwell insisted on honoring her late husband. Meanwhile, Lucas and Vanessa's fall from grace continued with breathtaking speed. Their investors pulled out, their credit lines were called in, the house, my house, was scheduled for transfer to the foundation, and they'd been served with eviction papers. The gossip blogs were merciless. Someone leaked photos from Vanessa's Instagram showing their lavish lifestyle, the trips to Cabo, the designer clothes, the $500 dinner bills, juxtaposed against the recordings of them planning to warehouse me in a cut-rate facility. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict, and it was damning. 3 weeks after the signing, I was reviewing foundation paperwork when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. "Mom?" The voice was broken, barely recognizable. "It's Luke." Luke. He hadn't called himself that since high school. "I know you hate me." He continued before I could speak. "I know I deserve everything that's happened, but Vanessa, she's gone. Took what little money we had left and flew to her sister's in California. Divorce papers were waiting when I got home from another rejection meeting." I set down my pen. Looking out at the lake, a kayaker was paddling by, leaving ripples in the calm water. "I'm sleeping in my car," he said. "The Mercedes got repossessed yesterday, so it's just the Honda. I've applied for jobs, but nobody will hire me. My face has been all over the news. I'm scared, Mom." I close my eyes. Even now, even after everything, hearing my child in pain was like a knife to the heart. "There's a Motel 6 on Riverside Drive," I said finally. "I'll call and pay for a week. After that, you're on your own." "Mom, Don't," I cut him off. "This isn't forgiveness. Lucas, this is me being more human than you were. 1 week. Use it to figure out your next steps." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I know," I said, and I did know. But sorry didn't erase 3 years of cruelty. Sorry didn't undo the plan to lock me away. Sorry was just a word, and words were cheap. I hung up and made the call to the motel, then went back to my paperwork. The foundation's first residents would move in within 6 months. Women who'd been discarded, overlooked, forgotten. They would have homes now. Dignity, community. My phone buzzed with another text. This time it was a photo from Patricia Walsh. The construction crew had started work on the Harold Caldwell Memorial Center. They were cutting the first window into what had been my basement prison. I smiled, imagining sunlight flooding into that dark space. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't just destroying those who hurt you. Sometimes it's transforming that hurt into something beautiful, something lasting, something that ensures no one else suffers the same fate. The ledger was balanced, the story was written, and somewhere in Austin, my son was sleeping in a Honda, finally understanding what it felt like to be thrown away. I picked up my pen and went back to work. There were still so many women to help. 6 months later, I stood in what had once been my prison, now transformed into a sunlit community room. The basement windows had been enlarged, the walls painted a cheerful yellow, and the space hummed with life. Women sat at tables playing cards, chatting over coffee, their laughter filling the air where my silent tears had once fallen. The doorbell rang, a sound I'd heard countless times over the past months. But today was different. Today was the day I'd been preparing for. I opened the door to find Lucas and Vanessa standing on my porch. They looked smaller somehow, diminished. Lucas had lost weight, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. Vanessa's designer outfit had been replaced with off-the-rack clothing, her platinum hair showing dark roots. "Hello, Mother," Lucas said quietly. I studied them for a moment. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that might have been humility, or perhaps just defeat. "We have nowhere else to go," Vanessa said, the words seeming to physically pain her. "My sister kicked me out. Lucas's friends won't return his calls. We've lost everything." "I know," I said simply. Lucas's eyes filled with tears. "We were wondering, hoping, if maybe we could stay here just for a little while until we get back on our feet." I looked at them standing there. These two people who had caused me such pain, who had planned to lock me away and steal my dignity. They were asking for mercy they'd never shown, kindness they'd never offered. "No," I said. The word hung in the air between us, final and absolute. "But Mom," Lucas started. "Do you remember," I interrupted, "what Vanessa said when I asked to keep my garden? She told me I could buy vegetables at Whole Foods. Do you remember when I was sick and you moved me to the basement? You said the rental income would help with your investments. Do you remember all the times you told me I was too old, too irrelevant, too much of a burden?" They stood silent, unable to meet my eyes. "There's a shelter on East 7th Street, I continued, my voice steady. "They serve hot meals and have job placement programs. I believe they even have couples accommodations, though there's usually a waiting list." Vanessa's face crumpled. "You're really going to make us go to a homeless shelter?" "I'm not making you do anything," I replied. "Your choices brought you here. I'm simply suggesting an option, which is more than you ever gave me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card. "This is the number for a social worker who specializes in housing assistance. Tell her I sent you. She'll help you navigate the system." Lucas took the card with trembling fingers. "I don't understand. Why would you help us at all?" "Because," I said, looking him directly in the eyes, "I'm not you." From behind me came the sound of laughter. One of the residents was telling a story about her grandchildren, and the others were responding with warmth and joy. This was what family sounded like. Chosen family, bonded not by blood, but by understanding and mutual respect. "Maggie," a voice called, "the documentary crew is here. They want to interview you for the segment on the foundation." I glanced back, then returned my attention to the two people on my porch. "I have to go. Good luck to you both." "Mom, wait," Lucas said desperately. "I love you. Despite everything, I do love you." I paused, considering his words. Love isn't just a word, Lucas. It's an action. It's choosing someone's well-being over your own comfort. It's seeing them as a whole person, not just what they can do for you. You may feel love, but you never showed it, and that's what matters. I stepped back, preparing to close the door. But there was one more thing that needed to be said. "There's something else you should know. Your father would have forgiven you. Harold always believed in second chances, in the power of redemption. He would have opened this door and welcomed you in with open arms." Hope flickered in Lucas's eyes. "But I'm not Harold," I finished, "and this is my door now." I closed it gently but firmly, listening to their footsteps fade away down the path. Through the window, I watched them walk toward their battered car, a far cry from the Mercedes they'd once flaunted. They moved slowly, heads down, the picture of defeat. Did I feel satisfaction? Perhaps a little, but mostly, I felt peace. The kind of peace that comes from standing in your truth, from refusing to be diminished, from turning pain into purpose. Maggie, the documentary producer, appeared at my elbow. "We're ready when you are." I smoothed my hair and straightened my shoulders. Let's tell them about the women who live here. Their stories are what matter now. As I walked toward the community room, I passed the wooden sign I'd had installed by the front door. Harold had always talked about having one made but never got around to it. Now it hung there, beautifully carved and prominently displayed. Entry by invitation only. Some might call it cold, others might say it was harsh, but for those of us who'd been pushed aside, locked away, and treated as less than human, it was a declaration of independence. We chose who entered our lives now. We set the terms. We held the keys. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows that had been cut into my former prison, warming my face as I took my seat for the interview. Around me, the women of Silverhaven went about their lives, playing cards, sharing meals, tending the garden that bloomed where Vanessa's infinity pool had been planned. This was my revenge, complete and perfect, not just the destruction of those who'd wronged me, but the creation of something better in its place. Not just balancing the books, but starting a whole new ledger. As the cameras rolled and I began to tell our story, I thought of all the women who would hear it, the ones trapped in basements and back rooms, dismissed and discarded by their own families, the ones who thought they had no options, no power, no voice. To them, I had just one thing to say. You are not furniture. You are not disposable. You are not too old, too weak, or too irrelevant to fight back. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply refusing to disappear. The red light on the camera blinked steadily as I spoke, and somewhere in Austin, in a battered Honda parked outside a homeless shelter, my son was learning what it felt like to be invisible. The ledger was balanced. The story was complete. And I, Margaret Caldwell, 74 years old, survivor and architect of my own salvation, was finally, truly free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're hearing this. Please leave a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your own experiences and perspectives make this community richer. What would you have done in Maggie's situation? Let me know in the comments.